Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm Deb Philman, mom, homeschooler, educator. So today we will cover chapter 2 of John Taylor Gatto's Dumbing Us Down. I did give you 2 videos on chapter 1. I broke it into 2 parts because it was very long, but this is actually the second chapter of the book. Now, the good news is this chapter repeats some of the ideas and themes from the first chapter, and part of the reason for that is this too was a speech. The first one was a speech given in 1991 when he was awarded a Teacher of the Year award. And this one was actually given in 1990 when the New York State Senate awarded him New York City Teacher of the Year. So again, it's picture him standing there giving a speech. This time you have politicians sitting in the audience. We know there are bunches of politicians sitting in the audience amongst others. And consider that when I start telling you what things he was saying in this speech. I think it's relevant. The other thing I'm going to do in presenting this chapter to you and analyzing it for you, or giving you my takeaways, if you will, is I'm starting at the end. I'm going to start from the end of it and kind of work my way back to the beginning, because he ends with suggestions on what he thinks should be done. This is 31 years ago, and I think it's timely. I think it's timely because of what he says. So let me read to you what he says in this last, and by the way, the chapter is entitled The Psychopathic School. And the reason he calls it the psychopathic school is not that all the people within the school are psychopaths. Okay, in fact, he goes to great lengths in the beginning of this chapter to accept the award on behalf of the other wonderful educators he works with. And he does call them out. He's not by name, but he says there are other wonderful human beings trying as hard as he's trying to do good work within the system. It's the system, it's the school, okay, in scare quotes, that is psychopathic because it doesn't care. The system doesn't care. It can't care. And the system is dominant. So even when you put caring people into it, the system kind of gobbles them up. It either gobbles them up after they get there, or it recruits people to it who fit well into that system and are less caring than you would like to see in a school, caring for your children. So, but he did acknowledge that there are other, caring individuals. They just can't rise above the system because it is psychopathic. So here's what he says. And think about this in the context of this past year and schools being closed and why they're closed and what it's done. What has it done? And also consider that I have said multiple times on this channel that I think we are at the start of a golden age of education. Maybe that's my optimism talking. I don't know. But I think this is an opportunity. I said it in my last video. I know there were some parents who were rankled by what I said, but I'm trying to, shake them, lovingly shake them and say, this is an opportunity for you to connect with your children. This is an opportunity for you to do something better for them, for all of us as a nation to improve the education we give our children simply by not using the schools. And we've been given this opportunity against our will, right? I mean, I was already homeschooling, but I'm saying for those who weren't. But listen to what he says. He says, no large-scale reform is ever going to work to repair our damaged children and our damaged society until we force open the idea of school to include family as the main engine of education. If we use schooling to break children away from their parents, and make no mistake, that has been the central function of schools since John Cotton announced it as the purpose of the Bay Colony schools in 1650, and Horace Mann announced it as the purpose of Massachusetts schools in 1850. We're going to continue to have the horror show we have right now. The curriculum of family is at the heart of any good life. We've gotten away from that curriculum. It's time to return to it. The way to sanity and education is for our schools to take the lead in releasing the stranglehold of institutions on family life, to promote during school time confluences of parent and child that will strengthen the family bonds. Where have our children been when they have not been in school in the past year? They've been at home, presumably with family. And I know, so you don't need to tell me in the comments or emails, that not every child has a loving home. I know that. It breaks my heart. And I also know that even those who have a parent may not have 2 parents. I know that parents need to work. I know these things. I also know that the vast majority of American children are home with some kind of family. And the children who don't have that do not do better because we take the children who do and force them into a similar situation away from family. That doesn't help them. In fact, I would say it hurts them because the overall society then becomes sick. The society that ought to be supporting those children who don't have the benefit of family and don't have that loving support, the society that will support them will be a much better society, a much richer, and I don't mean in money, society if you have healthy, happy, well-adjusted majorities. Okay? That is where I stand on this. So you can point to the minority. You can point to the people who don't have. But if your solution is, let's make everyone not have, let's pull everyone away from their family, you are missing the boat big time, and you are showing me that you don't actually care about the people who don't have. You just feel some kind of resentment or envy or anger or frustration, enmity towards those who do. Okay? That's what you're showing. Because you don't help someone who doesn't have by hurting someone who does. Never happened, never will work in the history of mankind. So let's just get that idea right out of your head. And he would say the same. He would say the same. He's saying that for the benefit of all, you do what's best. You do what's best for any child. If there is a given child that doesn't have that, so it can't be, given to them or it can't be protected for them, you don't not give it to the others. You do what is the right thing to do, period. So I agree with him on that point. And you might wonder, well, why? Okay, so why? Why should the family be the center? Why should that be the main point? Well, then we have to jump back to the beginning of the chapter to where he explains that. And he says that children, when they go to school, are pulled out of community life. They're not in a community. They're in a school. A school is not a community. You can say, well, I have a community of the school. Not really. And the reason for that is they are segregated into a classroom where all the people there are the same age, but for the teacher or teacher's aide or the administrator or whatever. So it is still a very segregated community by age. Okay. Then you segregate them by abilities, then by what they're working on. Then you might, they segregate themselves. They now, of course, with racial affinity groups and so forth, they're just broken into little tiny networks. That's not community. That's not a community. In fact, he says, we seem to have lost our identity. Children and old people are penned up and locked away from the business of the world to a degree without precedent. Nobody talks to them anymore, and without children and old people mixing in daily life, a community has no future and no past, only a continuous present. Remember, he said that in the prior chapter. He talks about a continuous present. And we see kids today who approach everything with a mindset of presentism. That's what I call it, presentism. They are the type of people who will go to the refrigerator. And this happened, right? But we noticed it when the pandemic hit and everything was locked down. There were people who would just, why are the store shelves empty? I don't understand. Where did the toilet paper go? Or, what do you mean we're out of milk? How can that be? Things just appear. It's always there. They don't have any understanding of where things come from. Where was the milk before it was in the store? Where was the toilet paper before it was on a roll in the store? Where were these things? How did these things get made? And what was the process all through the years that led up to that? They don't know. And when you talk to them about race in America and all the problems and let's tear down some statues and so forth, they'll say, well, this was a terrible thing. Do you have any concept of what the past was like? No, they don't. They don't. They see, bad person by today's standards must tear down statue. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you I don't see the point in having Confederate generals standing in the public square. I don't know why we would do that. It is history. Put it in a museum, put it in a private collection. But I don't really have a significant problem with peacefully relocating these statues on principle. But tearing down the past for the sake of it, because it doesn't measure up to today's standards, tearing down George Washington or Abraham Lincoln because they were imperfect people by today's standards. I got news for you. current politicians are imperfect people by today's standards. We're not tearing them down yet, are we? So telling children that the things from the past don't measure up to today, and that inherently makes it something you should throw away, burn the book, don't read the book, tear down the statue. This is a kind of presentism that is very dangerous. You're removing all context. I mean, pick up 1984 and read it. You'll understand very quickly the consequences of removing the past. You eliminate any ideas about the future, because if you don't understand the past and you can't perceive progress, you certainly don't have any framework for understanding how to hope or plan or dream about the future. All you know is now. It's literally prerequisite understanding the past. He talks about the lack of community. He says, school is a major actor in this tragedy, as it is a major actor in the widening gulf among social classes. Using school as a sorting mechanism, we appear to be on the way to creating a caste system. On the way. That was 31 years ago. So when you hear people say, it's like a caste system, the same people, by the way, who praise the teachers' unions, who fetishize public school teachers, call them heroes, even as they refuse to go back to work and continue to take their pay. A caste system. Where'd that come from? Who created it? Yeah. Complete with untouchables who wander through the subway trains begging and who sleep upon the streets of San Francisco and LA and Portland and Seattle and the most progressive places on earth. Why are these people allowed to continue to call themselves progressives? Because that seems to me rather regressive, actually. So then he says, I've noticed a fascinating phenomenon in my 30 years of teaching. Schools and schooling are increasingly irrelevant to the great enterprises of the planet. The truth is, schools don't really teach anything about how to obey orders. It's like I've said, do as you're told, check the right boxes, fill in the right forms. There's no context. It's not connected to anything. It's not teaching you a specific skill. Okay. So what happens? What happens when that occurs? Well, you have people who are, they're not educated. They're schooled. And there's a big difference. And he points that out. He points out that as human beings, he says, this sounds very harsh, but try to understand it in context. As human beings, they're useless to others and useless to themselves. Okay. Successful people are independent, self-reliant, confident, and individualistic because community life that protects the dependent and the weak is dead and only networks remain. So success today requires you to be able to function as a solo person, like alone, and be very comfortable with that. Except the problem is most humans are not comfortable with that. Most humans are not, we're social creatures, right? We keep hearing about, what about socialization? What about socialization? How can you homeschool? What about socialization? Well, you don't send your child to school to be socialized. That should be done in the community. That should be done by the family. That should be done by a wide variety of age ranges and socioeconomic groups and people who do different kinds of jobs so kids can see what the world looks like, how it works, where might I fit into all of this, what might I want to do when I'm an adult. I should actually concern myself with the ways of adults, maybe so I can grow up and be one, okay? But when you pull kids out of that community, you isolate them with their own age group, you cut them off from seeing the world and being in the world, and they don't have that kind of community, and that is what holds up people who do have weaknesses, who aren't comfortable being alone, or they aren't as individualistic or, entrepreneurial or whatever. When you cut that off, they're not as successful. They're just not. We've disconnected people from each other and made it absolutely essential that the kids go to school because otherwise they might not see anybody all day except some paid caregiver. So when he talks about returning to the family unit for this, he's talking about healing all of it, getting a better education in life, not just reading, writing, and arithmetic. To be a successful human, you have to understand how the world works and that there is a past and a present and a future. And he says it is absurd and anti-life to be part of a system that compels you to sit in confinement with people of exactly the same age and social class. That system effectively cuts you off from the immense diversity of life and the synergy of variety. Indeed, it cuts you off from your own past and future, sealing you in a continuous present, much the same way television does. Now, when he was speaking, television was the big distractor. Okay? Now we have the internet and television and movies and video games and on and on and on. And so it goes. Now, another thing he talks about is the history of schooling. And I mentioned it in the last video, and I'm going to bring it up again because I imagine there's some of you still out there saying, okay, but Deb, it's so, how are they going to learn those so fine? And they're home and look, and the kids are home, but they're not learning and that isn't happening. Well, maybe it's not happening because too many parents, too many people are sitting home waiting for those experts to tell them what to do instead of seeking it out. Instead of saying, my child needs to learn this, my child needs to learn that, I need to go find an expert. Okay, look at my children, right? I'm homeschooling. I went out and I did research and I found the best experts in the subjects they needed. I can't teach Latin, okay? So I went and I found Lukian, the Lukian Project. And I found the very best people, the experts in teaching the classics, and the experts at teaching Latin and Greek. So my daughter would have Latin teachers who knew what the heck they were doing. And I hired them. Now, if that's beyond somebody's means, there are other things they can do. Okay? So, but that's what I did. I took it upon myself to go find these resources so my child could learn what she needed to learn. But that didn't take me more than knowing how to use the internet. Okay? It didn't take me more than knowing how to read and be able to look at somebody's bio and look at somebody, just like if I were hiring somebody, anybody. As I've said in previous videos, many of you parents do a better job researching what car to buy than who should teach my child. Do you even know who's teaching your child? Do you know what their background is? Do you know where they went to school? Have you seen their resume? Do you know what kind of reviews they have? Do you know what prior students have said about them? Did you even get to choose? Or was your child just assigned? Okay, so who's going to teach them? Well, I'll ask you, who's going to teach them? You don't know. The school. You don't know that. You don't know. Okay. Now, maybe if your child is in a private, high-cost prep school, you might be able to handpick your teacher then, perhaps, maybe, but probably not then either. Let's go back to that history because it is really important. I got to drill this in. Our form of compulsory schooling is an invention of the state of Massachusetts around 1850. It was resisted, by the way. It was resisted. Sometimes with guns, by an estimated 80% of the Massachusetts population. The last outpost in Barnstable on Cape Cod did not surrender its children until the 1880s when the area was seized by militia. Okay. And children marched to school under guard. They were forced literally. So the word compulsory is literal. And when people like me say to you that kids are forced under gunpoint to go to these schools or to go to school, that's what we're talking about. It's not, they don't need to bring the guns this time because so many generations have dutifully marched off to school or marched their kids off to school without giving it a second thought. In fact, many people have probably even had children or moved to certain towns or certain zip codes thinking, oh yes, but the school will take care of it. There, I had a child and someone will educate it besides me. And they've forgotten that they're their child's first teacher and they're their child's most important teacher ongoing. Anything your child is going to learn about real life and how to deal with people and where they fit in the world is going to come from you. It's not going to come from the school. So they had to get marched off under guard. And even Senator Ted Kennedy, not too long before this speech was given, commissioned a report. Tell me how literate everybody is compared to the past. Guess what he found out? That's when he found out that the state, prior to compulsory education, the state literacy rate was 98% in Massachusetts. But afterwards, after they forced these kids into schools, even at the very beginning, it never got above 91 again. Then he talks about homeschooling. And I hope you all listen to this because, again, 1990, this one. Here's another curiosity to think about. The homeschooling movement has quietly grown to a size where 1.5 million, this is 31 years ago, I'm pretty sure it's a lot bigger now, young people are being educated entirely by their own parents. Now that's not being done entirely by their own parents, by the way. The homeschooling movement has changed. We have co-ops, we have online educators like Lukion, and High School Math Live, and Time for Learning, and History at My House, and I could go on for days. Okay? So many other opportunities where it's not mom standing there at the kitchen table, No, no. It's different, but back then even, educated entirely by their own parents. Last month, the Education Press reported the amazing news that in their ability to, and this is when it was just their parents, not teachers online helping, like teachers, experts in their fields, in their ability to think, children schooled at home seem to be 5 or even 10 years, not months, years, ahead of their formally trained peers. 5 to 10 years. He makes a list of what kids that he teaches actually are in school, what they actually are, because they're not what you think they are. What the effect on them is not what you think it is. Okay, so people going, they got to go to school. It's such a positive influence. He says the children I teach are indifferent to the adult world. We talked about that the other day. This defies the experience of thousands of years. A close study of what big people were up to was always the most exciting occupation of youth. But nobody wants children to grow up these days, least of all the children themselves. No. Don't touch the stove. You'll burn yourself. No, I'll cook it. No, let's just order out. No, I'll take care of it. No, I'll drive you. Don't make your own plans. I don't know where you're going. The children I teach have almost no curiosity. And what little they do have is transitory. They cannot concentrate for very long, even on things they choose to do. Can you see a connection between the bells ringing again and again, like little Pavlovian bells, to change classes and this phenomenon of evanescent attention? I teach children who have a poor sense of the future. We talked about that because they have no sense of the past. They have a poor sense of the future. They are ahistorical. They have no sense of how past has predestinated their own present, limits their choices, shapes their values and lives. And so, of course, when they're rampaging through the streets, burning down city blocks, looting, or cheering on the people who do and saying, we have to tear it all down. We need a Marxist future. We need communism. Do you think they have even the foggiest clue what communism is? Never mind what it did, how many millions of people it destroyed. The children I teach are cruel to each other. I can vouch for that. They lack compassion for misfortune. They laugh at weakness. They have contempt for people whose need for help shows too plainly. And as of now, they also increasingly have contempt for anyone who thinks differently than they do. They are 100% certain of their beliefs, 100% certain of their opinions, as ill-formed as they are, as uncritical as they have formed them. They are so certain they're right and so certain they're wrong. And guess what? Wrong is now equated with evil. Yeah. Guess what happens to people when they decide that the people who are different from them are evil? Nothing good. And you see, again, if they had any concept of history, they might understand that. They're ratting out their own parents. Yeah, for wrong think. That's true. Okay, so we've got that on top of being bullies and having no compassion for people who have problems. They're uneasy with intimacy. Oh, isn't that true? Very hard time forming friendships. They cannot deal with genuine intimacy because a lifelong habit of preserving a secret inner self inside a larger outer personality. They've had a persona all this time. People think that your online persona is just new and it's a new thing because you're online. Oh no, kids go to school and create one too. They're used to this. That's why they're such experts for a very long time. Actually, that's why we all took to it so well, because we've had experience. Every day in school, let me put on my persona. Here I am. Then you go home. I used to see my kids. They'd get in the car at the end of the day and just collapse in a heap. Can I listen to music? They'd plug in. They'd drown out the noise of the day. They'd be surly. They'd be cranky. It would take them at least an hour to decompress after they got home and after they took off their persona. All smiles all day. Come home. And then, of course, he says they're materialistic, which we already know they are. They're taught that in school, too. Here's your grade. Here's an A. Here's a B. Here's a this. Here's a that. I reward you. I pat you on the head. Everything is transactional. And, obviously very good teachers do more than that. But they get used to looking for little prizes. Here's your treat, doggy. Here you go. Children I teach are dependent, passive, and timid in the presence of new challenges. We know that. They don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to disappoint anybody. Failure is not rewarded in school. It's just not. And yet, most of education is failure and then getting back up and trying again. Try. Denzel Washington said it. I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like, fall down 10 times, get up 11. Whatever. I mean, whatever the number was, that was the gist of it. And we don't do that. So he says, what can be done? We need a ferocious national debate that doesn't quit day after day, year after year, the kind of continuous debate that journalism finds boring. Actually, they don't find this kind of debate boring. They just find the continuousness of it boring. And they much prefer it to be sensationalistic. Who's fighting with who and who's going to win in the cage match between public education and the unions and the parents and the children and the homeschoolers and all. Sunday, tune in for the big fight. Who's going to win? MMA. PS versus HS. We need to scream and argue about this school thing until it's fixed or broken beyond repair, one or the other. So even he back then realized that we might have to break it to fix it. If we can fix it, fine. If we cannot, then the success of homeschooling shows a different road that has great promise. Pouring the money we now pour into schooling back into family education might cure 2 ailments with 1 medicine, repairing families as it repairs children. And it brings me full circle to where I started. That this is a golden opportunity, folks. I hope you will seize it. And to that end, let me invite you to my locals community where I have a weekly Zoom call where you can ask any questions you want about homeschooling, self-directed learning, resources. You can go ahead and be the biggest skeptic in the world. But what about this, Deb? But what about that? I'll try to answer your questions best I can. I might not be able to answer them all, but you should ask them. I would rather you ask them than decide you don't need to ask them because you already have the answer, and the answer is public school. Because this 30-plus year veteran, 31 years ago, was crystal clear, award-winning teacher, crystal clear. The public school is not the answer to all of the ailments of our society. So next time you hear somebody say, but we need this because of the poor, and we need this because of the minorities, and we need this because of race relations, and we need this because of this, they have had since 1880, where they took our children off at gunpoint to do this thing they said would fix it all. They said this was going to be great. We were going to turn out model citizens and it was going to be fantastic. Of course, that wasn't their intention at all, as he said in the last chapter. So that's the second chapter. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll read the book, read it yourself. But in the meantime, those are the highlights. Those are my takeaways. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the locals group. Have a great evening.